Hey there, and welcome back to the deep dive. We're about to jump into some pretty intense source material you've shared with us. It's a collection of excerpts, looks like, from a YouTube discussion, and it offers a very critical take on the state of things in the UK.
That's right. The voices we hear in these clips include people like Charlie Kirk, Katie Hopkins, Neil Hamilton, and someone named Christine,
Yeah.
all talking about UK society, politics, quite a mix.
So what's our mission today?
Well, like always here on the Deep Dive, we're basically your guides through this stuff. We're going to unpack the specific claims, the perspectives inside these sources. We'll pull out the key ideas and just try to understand what these voices are saying about, free speech, justice, immigration over there.
Right.
And just to be absolutely clear up front, our job here is just to understand and lay out what's in the source material. We're not here to agree or disagree, just to explore the content itself.
Absolutely. And the picture these sources paint is, well, it's pretty stark, isn't it?
Yeah.
They talk about the UK being in a state of decay, even predict a potential uprising. It's strong stuff. A lot to get into. So let's dive in.
Okay.
So let's start with this central idea they put forward, this notion that societies tend to decay against the roots that created them.
Yeah.
One speaker even uses, like, the second law of thermodynamics as an analogy, which is dramatic.
It is, and that general idea of decay leads them straight to a really specific claim about the UK. They argue that Britain, the country they credit with basically inventing free speech for the world.
Has now lost it. Is that the argument?
That's exactly the claim they make. Fundamentally lost it.
Wow. Okay, so how do they back that up? Do they give examples?
They do. The sources point to specifics they use as evidence for this idea of lost free speech. They highlight a figure stating, and they emphasize this specific number, that 30 people a day are arrested in the UK for inflammatory social media posts.
30 a day, just for posts.
That's the number cited in the material, yeah. And they contrast that very starkly with a historical view. They mention 18th century judges who, they say, acted like champions, protecting speech from government interference.
Right.
So the view in the sources is that modern restrictions, especially what they call so-called hate speech in the equalities legislation, have just chipped away at that freedom over time.
And you could really feel the strength of this view in a quote they include from Charlie Kirk. He's quoted saying, these are his words from the source, "If you want to renew your love of America, spend 3 days in the UK, you will kiss the ground when you get back home."
Strong words.
Yeah. And apparently he goes on, according to the source, to call the UK a totalitarian country.
So really pulling no punches there in the source material.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And the discussion in these sources doesn't just stop at free speech, does it? It moves on to a pretty big critique of the UK justice system and prisons specifically.
Yeah, exactly. A core issue they raise is prison overcrowding. They claim it's directly causing violent offenders to be released early. The sources are explicit, saying prisoners are let go in order to create spaces.
Just to make space.
That's the claim. And to really hammer home what they see as, completely skewed priorities, the sources bring up some very specific, contrasting examples. They mention claims, these are claims within the source material, that child rapists and violent criminals are apparently being released, or maybe not even spending time in prison.
Okay.
And they put that right alongside the case of a woman named Lucy Connolly. The source emphasizes she got 31 months for a tweet they claim was deleted in 15 minutes and sent days before any related disorder.
Right. And they also say she posted other tweets during the disorder condemning the violence.
Exactly. The sources make that point, too.
The way her case is framed in this material, it's clearly meant to be impactful. Katie Hopkins' view, which seems strongly supported by others in the discussion, is that Connolly isn't just a prisoner, she's a hostage.
A hostage of the British state. That's the term used.
And do the sources offer a reason why they think she's being held like this, or why these early releases are happening?
They do. From their perspective, it's not random. It's not just mismanagement. They claim it's a deliberate message, an intentional signal being sent to the British people.
And that message is?
According to the sources, the message is, you stay in your place, keep your heads down, stay compliant, you don't ask questions, basically keep quiet.
Wow. So they connect the early release of violent criminals directly to controlling the public.
Yes, they argue it's no coincidence. They link the releases and the creation of temporary prison spaces directly to this perceived message of control. Or possibly, as Katie Hopkins suggests in the material, maybe even making space for future trouble, future unrest. The sources also bring up a specific point about a Lord Justice delaying Lucy Connolly's release, even after a Court of Appeal decision. Their interpretation, the one presented in the source, is that he was being told, essentially, what will be best for the British government, not deciding based on law or facts.
Okay. And there's also a quick mention, isn't there, about the Justice Secretary, Shebna Mahmood. The sources didn't seem impressed.
No, they found her response unconvincing, is the word used, and her proposed reforms. A recipe for carnage, according to the material. It's worth noting, though, the source did say they thought Robert Jenrick's response on related matters was good.
Got it.
And then, adding another layer to this critique of the justice system, the sources make a pretty startling claim about who's actually in the prisons and who's in control. They state it very directly. The nationality of the persistent offenders in prison is not British.
Not British.
And they elaborate, most of these people are not British. And going even further, the sources assert that our prisons are now controlled by Muslim gangs.
Controlled by gangs.
That's the assertion. And they cite a specific incident, the slashing of a prison officer's throat at HMP Woodhill. They make a point of mentioning that's where Tommy Robinson is housed, using this as an example to back up their claim about gang control.
Okay, so that's quite a picture of the justice system presented in these sources.
It really is.
And moving on from justice, the sources then seem to connect this whole idea of societal decay to immigration.
Yes, that's the next major theme. And they use some very specific figures to make their case here. According to the material, the political class and deep state are supposedly patting themselves on the back for getting net migration down to 431,000 a year.
431,000, okay. And how do the sources frame that number?
Well, they immediately criticize it very sharply. It's described quite dramatically as the size of Bristol being exported here mainly from the Third World in 1 year.
Size of Bristol?
That's the comparison used in the source. They also claim the total legal arrivals in 1 year hit 948,000 people, arriving, they say, into a crippled country.
And crucially, the sources argue these official numbers don't tell the whole story.
Exactly. They stress that, in their view, none of these figures take into account the terrorists, the rapists, the drug dealers, the murderers, is invading our country every single day via our unprotected channel southern border.
Invading. Strong language again?
Very. They cite a specific number for channel crossings on one particular day mentioned. 800 yesterday alone, that's just on boats. And they add that unknown numbers are arriving in lorries, including, the source claims, Iranian terrorists.
And what about people who overstay visas?
The sources mention an estimate of 1.3 million illegal overstayers, but then they state their own belief that it's definitely 2 million plus.
Okay. And there's a historical comparison brought in here, too, isn't there? Something about Enoch Powell.
Yes, Neil Hamilton shares an anecdote in the source material about Powell. He says back in 1968, when Powell gave his famous Rivers of Blood speech, the average net inflow was around 50,000.
50,000 then versus over 400,000 now, according to the figure they cited earlier.
Right. Hamilton highlights that 50,000 is 1/10 of the figure the current establishment is supposedly celebrating. And the sources explicitly attribute these high current numbers to a conservative government, claiming it's because Boris Johnson relaxing controls on visas.
So beyond the numbers, the sources also talk about cultural impacts they link to immigration.
They do. They touch on a link between prosperity and what they call degeneracy. This includes, they suggest, moving away from traditional structures like stable monogamy, though they do add a caveat that this structure isn't universal. But the broader point they're making is that so much of our culture is being dismantled.
And they use an example from Rotherham, the mayor election.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They use that to illustrate the point somewhat, as they put it. They quote the mayor, Rexana Ismail, saying after her election, "I am representing my Pakistani nation and Pakistani Muslim women. I am very proud wearing hijab. Wherever I go, I will represent Muslim women."
And the sources then question that.
Explicitly. The question raised in the material is, shouldn't she be representing everyone in Rotherham? This, according to the sources, shows a kind of fragmentation leading to what they term communalism.
Communalism. What do they mean by that in this context?
They describe it as a situation where people vote not for the national interest, but they voted for their own compatriots, their own co-religionists, or others of their cultural background.
Yeah.
They portray this as people fighting, quote, the battles of Pakistan or Gaza or wherever, rather than focusing on British political causes.
Okay. And they use a medical analogy here too, right?
A very stark one. They compared this cultural fragmentation to necrotizing fasciitis, a flesh-eating disease. The analogy is that this fragmentation is destroying the nation from the inside, like the body eating itself. And linked to this, they also make the claim that a very large number of Labor MPs nowadays. First loyalty is not to this country.
Wow. Okay, so connecting all these threads then, the critique of free speech, the justice system, the immigration figures, the cultural impact, the sources seem to have a very specific view of the political establishment driving all this.
That's right. It all comes back to that. The sources argue either that the British establishment has gone completely mad, or alternatively, that it's deliberately following an agenda being imposed upon us all to destroy most of the things which made Britain great.
An agenda.
That's the term used. And they introduced this idea of a uni-party. The claim is that for about 30 years or so, British governments, whether conservative, liberal, or Labour, have basically all had the same mindset. Indistinguishable in practice.
The uniparty.
Yeah. And the sources claim this explains why the Conservative Party is struggling now and why Labour seems to them to be heading the same way, although they do mention Reform UK as a party that's challenging this consensus, in their view.
Right. And against this backdrop, this establishment they see as disconnected or even destructive, and all the societal issues they've outlined, the sources then claim the public is reacting.
Yes, they claim the British public is now rising in revolt against this, and so it should.
And they bring Enoch Powell back into it here.
They do. They claim that despite how the media portrayed it back then, the British public at the time of the Rivers of Blood speech was actually 23 in favor of Enoch Powell and what he said.
23-1 in favor. Really?
That's the figure stated in the source. And the reason given is they realized what was happening then, and my God, they realize now, implying a continuity of public feeling.
And how do they describe the current public mood?
The sources talk about a feeling of absolute helplessness, a sense that people just don't know what to do because of this avalanche that is overtaking this country. This feeling is particularly highlighted in the material for white British people in big cities who are described as feeling like a complete stranger in their own country.
A stranger in their own country. That's powerful imagery.
It is. And all of this, according to the perspective in these sources, builds towards their core prediction, which is
that there is only so long that you can keep doing this to people before that they see the system that is being used to control them is all a lie.
And this realization, they suggest, will inevitably lead to some kind of uprising in what they see as a society in decay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So quite a journey through this material. We've really dug into these sources and their very strong claims. We've covered the argument about lost free speech, the really controversial analysis of the justice system, those striking immigration figures, and this view of a disconnected establishment pushing society towards decay and potentially revolt.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate one last time, our aim here was purely to understand and present the specific viewpoints and claims found within the source material you shared with us, attributing those ideas clearly back to the sources themselves.
Definitely. It certainly gives you, the listener, a lot to think about. The sources we examined paint this picture of a society under, well, immense strain, facing fundamental changes, grappling with a perceived system of control that they claim is fundamentally dishonest, all a lie, as they put it. So maybe a final thought to leave you with is this. What does it really mean for any society when, as these particular sources describe it, large segments of the population feel unheard, or when they come to believe the system itself is basically a deception? How do different societies navigate those really complex tensions between tradition and change, free expression and social harmony, managing migration, maintaining cohesion, especially when trust to the core institutions is questioned in such stark and critical terms as we've heard described today?